Excellent. GM, how are we doing today? I guess everyone here wasn't partying hard last night, or maybe just too much coffee this morning. But no, thank you for making it. I'm excited to be here and really want to dig into tokenomics, everything and nothing all at once. And what the core focus today is going to be on is network effects and understanding the impact that blockchain and digital ownership has on how we understand network effects. So if this works, no? Ah, yes, there we go. So a very quick introduction. Tokenomics is a science that's still being explored, if you like, and we have many different understandings of what it actually means. So I've gone one slide too early. So this is our agenda for today. A quick recap of tokenomics, understanding network effects, using property ownership as an analogy that we can all understand, understanding the different layers of network effects, and then understanding the impact that has for tokenomics on-chain or within blockchain. So I've tried to break down tokenomics in as simpler way as possible. And really, it's a shortened version for token economics, and we can see the different breakdowns. And for me, really, it's thinking about it holistically, how we can design and implement an economic system which is underpinned or surrounded by digital assets. They can be fungible tokens or non-fungible tokens. It's not specific to a fungible token. What it also does, it encompasses the creation, distribution and management, or governance is one of the buzzwords we like to use in the space, within an ecosystem. And the real aim is to motivate and incentivize participants within that ecosystem for the desired behaviors and reward them accordingly. Ensure an equitable distribution, so making sure people are actually getting paid for the value of the work that they provide. And then for token ecosystems that have treasuries, maintaining a sustainable and valuable treasury, because that acts as a beacon of light, if you like, for people to come and join the ecosystem if they can see that there's funding there to be able to grow that ecosystem. So what we're going to see today is a few of these charts, and these charts are going to get maybe slightly more challenging as we go through it, but fundamentally we have to understand network effects. And it's, if we think of the official definition, they occur when a value of product or service increases as the number of users goes up. And we've got two different definitions on the screen. I won't bore you by reading them out. I'll give you a moment to read through them. But then really, considering I am from Animoca Brands, considering we're really big into gaming, using gaming as an analogy to start off to understand how this works. So what we've seen maybe over the past 20 years is a growth within gaming. And maybe what some of these positive feedback loops look like is gaming consoles, maybe your Xbox, your PlayStation, they create the consoles. Developers realize there is something new happening here. They will begin to develop games. That means there's more games for the consoles now to be able to launch on, which then attracts the users. And as more users come in, it begins to generate this positive feedback loop where each one is complementary to the other one. So can game consoles be successful on their own? Probably not. What they really need is supplementary effects through the game developers and then the gamers actually coming into play. And we begin to see positive feedback loops around that. And maybe this is our first example of network effects. Now, I like to engage the audience as much as I can. You're shown these two houses. House A is for $1.5 million and House B is for $150,000. 10% of the price of A. Quick show of hands. How many of us are going to buy House A? Okay, I like it. How many of us are buying House B? I think most of us are buying House B. But what's super interesting then is context, because this is a house on its own. Now, I'm going to go very quickly into an analogy around property ownership. And really, when we think about where we want to live, it's not about the house itself, it's also about the neighborhood. And the desirability of a neighborhood, what it does is attract more residents, and the more residents that are there, it increases property values. And similar to network effects, the value of being part of a network increases as the network grows. Well, what does this have to do? For those of you who have just joined, I want to jump back very quickly. You sort of had an option of which house you want to buy. The overwhelming majority was for House B. It's the same house. It's at 10% of the price. But if we zoom out to understand network effects, House A is in a very desirable area. What we can see is the amenities that are there, the parks are really nice, it's clean, it looks safe, all of a sudden we can begin to understand why the value of house A is a lot higher than the value of house B. Whereas in house B, it's in a rundown area, maybe it's not safe, the infrastructure is falling apart, it's not a desirable neighborhood. So we can now begin to understand the network effects. Even though we think of ownership of our home as a single entity, it actually has an impact on the wider area of which you're living. So with that in mind, I'd back to ask you guys the question again. Having seen what you've just seen, which house would you prefer, which neighborhood would you prefer to live in now? Neighborhood A or neighborhood B? Quick show of hands. Neighborhood A? Neighborhood B? How many of us know self-defense and no? Okay, fair enough. So I think it's very interesting how context changes things. And again, going back for those who have just joined, this is the power of network effects. The majority of us changed our vote from house B to house A because of the network effects around the property of where that property is located, the neighbors that we have, the safety that's there, and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, some of the core value of property ownership, and I've put property in italics here, because really we can change that with digital ownership. We can change it with many different types of ownership to really start to expand our horizons and the way we're thinking. So increased property value, this could be digital art value, it could be any other type of value. It really is due to the proximity to high quality amenities that are there, or high quality community members, or high quality value actors within an ecosystem. And the neighborhood, or the attractiveness of that neighborhood, draws in more residents. So if I live in an attractive neighborhood, the likelihood is more people are going to want to come in to live in this neighborhood and add value to that neighborhood. It's exactly the same with digital asset ecosystems. If I see there's an ecosystem where there's a lot of strong actors that are there, they're moving forward, even if the asset price is high, I may still want to buy into that ecosystem to be a part of that, so I can add value or maybe even extract value from that ecosystem. And again, we can see similar network effects where the value of participation increases as more participants join. So we really look at symbiotic relationships. And speaking of symbiotic relationships, some of the key points here is really positive interactions between different elements in the neighborhood create mutual benefits. And I've again tried to zoom in on a simple example here. So if you look at a well-maintained park, how many of us live near a nice park or near where we live back home? How many of us will tend to go on frequent walks within that park and feel safe within that area? So I think most of us here can resonate that a well-maintained park, what it actually does, it gives recreational space for residents, which means more residents will turn up at the park, but it will also increase property value around that specific area, which then means that there is a drip effect to the maintenance of these parks. Very simple analogy, but we can begin to see the strength. All we have here are, we can argue, three actors: the park, the residents, and property values. But as we start to expand ecosystems, what we'll see is the number of actors will grow over time as well. And that's maybe where the complexity begins to come in. But I think so far, so good with what we have here. Now, something else that's super important when we think about network effects, and more so when it comes to digital assets, it's really around predictable rules. And when I use the word investment, it's not necessarily investment of money, it's of resources. It could be your time, for example. It could be resources that are non-financial. And again, three very important key points before we jump into the flow that we have there. Predictable rules. As much as we love chaos, predictability actually gives us a strong foundation to be able to build on from. And we just need to look at maybe some of the more developed countries in the world. I mean, you can argue that today there's the sustainability is a different question. But I think something that's super important is when it comes to governance, if there's a stable government, what tends to happen is investment within these countries specifically will go up. And that comes from stability, where we know there's not going to be, a regime change overnight. It's very similar in crypto as well. If you know there's stability within an ecosystem, you're more likely to be a long-term holder within that ecosystem. If you can see an ecosystem is turbulent, or there's maybe too much FUD going on, you might sell. So predictability is something or when I say predictability, having a solid foundation to build from is something super important. Now, property rights is another one that I feel we don't fully understand. It's in the physical aspect we do understand. I own this building, I own this plot of land, I own this car. When it comes to materialistic things it makes sense. But when it comes to the digital realm, maybe it's slightly more challenging. So we'll stick with physical for now. I have property rights and I'm able to invest and grow the value of the property that I've invested in. And finally, to bring it back into Web3 and crypto, it's similar principles apply in blockchain networks where really the predictable incentives encourage participation and investment. If I know I'm staking, for example, and I'm adding value to an ecosystem, and this is the size of my rewards, then I'm more likely to continue staking and continue being an active member of that ecosystem. If I'm not sure of the size of the rewards, or there's FUD, or the rewards are going down over time, I will likely spend my time and my money in a different ecosystem. So something very important where stability is actually quite strong, and sort of to bring it into this, and I used to be a high school teacher for 10 years, so I do love being close to a board, or a screen in this case as well. And what we see is property rights and governance, what they really do for the two different stakeholders here. If I have rights over my property, then I'm more likely to invest as a homeowner, either in my own home or in other homes, to grow my portfolio. The same with a business. If I see an area is growing, I might open a restaurant, I might open another kind of shop where I know there'll be value that I can take, but also add to that community. And what all of this does, it then has an underlying impact on property values increasing in price. What I haven't shown here are actually the arrows going back to property rights and governance, and then back to businesses and homeowners. So what we're creating are different, and I think this is the important part, positive feedback loops. If you engage in a positive feedback loop and the outcome is desirable, then you're more likely to re-engage again. Again, back to the idea of predictable rules. If I'm engaging in something and I'm not sure what the outcome is, I might change and try to play a different game or engage within a different ecosystem. Or in this case, buy property in a different area. Now, I love myself a good butterfly, and I know more recently, I'm not sure how many of you on Twitter have been seeing the, maybe quick show of hands, the whole low float, high FDV stuff that's been happening on Twitter. No, in terms of projects launching, okay, one person. So I guess to bring it back to us, especially in Web3, we like to focus a lot on the community side of things, and digital assets governance, they allow us to empower communities. But there's also an argument that having private investors or people who have maybe a slightly different interest come in can add value. And the reason I've represented this as a butterfly is to think of the butterfly effects, the knock-on effects of the different stakeholders you have within your ecosystem. We've seen memes, for example. Memes are great because memes are purely community run in most instances, at least the most successful memes. But we also see maybe some of the more private blockchains, without naming any names, that are run more like a private business, even though they might have a foundational structure. They're also quite successful. So there's finding a balance. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. There is a balance between private and public. And I'd like to really think of this as a spectrum where you could be all the way, well, there's a big board behind me, but anyway, they could be all the way on the private side. You could be a meme coin, which is 100% decentralized on the community side, or you could be somewhere in the middle. So having a good balance is super important. Again, bringing it back to property, both public and private investments add to the overall attractiveness and value of that neighborhood. Just replace neighborhood with a Web3 or a digital ecosystem. Perfect. Now, we've spoken about property, I've tried to tie it in, but how do network effects really work in blockchain? For those that don't know, I am the head of Tokenomics at Animoca Brands, and what that really means is I'm focused a lot on incentive structures, on governance, on different stakeholders interacting together, and how can they all come together to create the positive feedback loops that we've been speaking about. So with that in mind, token incentives as digital property rights. If you own a token, be it fungible or non-fungible, you have ownership over that. And what that really means is that you can now become an active participant within an ecosystem. Your voice matters. Whereas maybe if I work for Uber, I have no voice. I'm an endpoint in that chain versus a node that communicates with the other key stakeholders. And then growth through participation. the value of blockchain networks really grow as more users and developers join, benefiting all parties. So growth is essential, but again, creating positive feedback loops, having structures that people can understand is super important to begin to get the right network effects. And we've been through the comparison to traditional property ownership, where similar to property ownership in a desirable neighborhood, where the value increases with more residents, more utilities, feeling loved by that community as well. And I think I'm going, and here what we can see is maybe a slightly more complex flowchart, but we begin to understand how each of the different stakeholders within an ecosystem begin to add value to that ecosystem. So starting off with users or community members, they have utility and access, they have increased participation. What that then does from a network effect perspective is developers want to build here. We know the community member is here, we know liquidity is here, so we want to be able to build, which is why Ethereum and EVM has the largest ecosystem as of now. I remember in 2018, how many of us have been in crypto since 2018? Okay, a few of us. Who remembers the amount of Ethereum killers that were coming out? Every other chain was an Ethereum killer. But now everyone is building on Ethereum. And those who are not EVM compatible are finding ways to become EVM compatible. And I think that's testament to the user base and the liquidity that's on Ethereum. So again, back to the point, more developers means that there'll be more applications coming out. If it's a proof of stake ecosystem, you have miners staking to secure the network. And again, we have increased security, so it becomes more desirable to build on this blockchain network. And governance as well. The bigger it grows, the more voting rights I have. In theory, the better the decisions and the proposals coming through to the DAO. And we can start to see something really working together to grow an ecosystem. And for me, I am blockchain agnostic, but I feel the Ethereum ecosystem is an ecosystem that's managed to achieve this. And even though they've gone through their challenges or from transitioning or still going through that, you can argue from proof of work to proof of stake, it's one of the biggest ecosystems of the right network effects that are happening there. To the extent that you can even argue layer 2s like Base have decided not to launch their own token, but using Ethereum as the gas token. Or there are other layer 2s, maybe like Polygon, for example. They probably won't like that I've called them a layer 2, but that's a discussion for another day. They can build their own token ecosystem, but everything taps back into Ethereum because of the high developer rate, the miners, the stakers, the governance that's happening, the users that are there. So it's always good to go with real world example of network effects and maybe how people have penetrated pre-existing markets. And I've got 2 from Web 2 and 1 from Web 3. And I think it's always good to go back to YouTube. YouTube is the beast it is today, not because of the value proposition it has today, but because of the value proposition it had when it first launched. As the internet was in its growth in the beginning stages of Web 2, if you like, what YouTube really allowed you to do was have a centralized location where you can upload your videos and embed those videos in other websites, in other ecosystems. And what was super important is because of the ease that you can do this, it attracted users to upload content via their infrastructure, not anyone else's infrastructure. Now, for the content creators, as more users began to visit YouTube, the content creators found it more valuable to upload their videos directly onto YouTube than onto third-party platforms. And what was the feedback loop that happened here? More content creators attracted more users, which in turn attracted more content creators. And the outcome was they achieved critical mass, becoming the leading video sharing platform. So we can begin to see the network effects that took place for YouTube to be where it is today. I think another more recent example, maybe Instagram. There was a period of time where the photo filtering tools were everywhere, but most of them were paid. If you wanted access to good filters, you had to pay for good filters, except one, which was Instagram. And they were drawn because it had an easy user experience. The UI was quite straightforward. I can use Instagram and then I can share my filtered photos to Facebook, to Twitter, and also to Instagram as well. And because they hit a critical mass of users who were sharing their photos on existing networks, what they were actually doing was promoting Instagram, because I had to download Instagram to be able to access these functionalities. And what does that feedback loop begin to look like? Well, increased visibility led to more users joining Instagram directly. And as opposed to now posting your content on a third party, you are posting purely on Instagram. And they managed to capitalize and capture a large chunk of market share and be the main social media platform for video and photo sharing. But this is where things get really interesting. And I've gone into ApeCoin DAO. And the reason I've done that, there's a bit of self-interest here. I am running for ApeCoin Special Counsel. So if you hold any ApeCoin, please be sure to vote. But really, what we have in the ApeCoin ecosystem are so many smaller aspects of that ecosystem. And again, we have ApeChain in development, which is going to bring a lot of utility to ApeCoin, but also a lot more eyes to the ecosystem. And it will enhance the Ape utility. The Formula One partnership with Alpine that was announced recently as well can really get us access to a community of high impact individuals. The Thank Ape initiative, I think, is in season 6, where they're contributing over 4 million ape for projects that are adding value to the ecosystem. And the impact it really has is that it's fostering innovation and it drives ecosystem growth. The GameFi DAOs and the vaults, again, contribution for game-focused DAOs and vaults. And this will expand the ape utility within games as well. Cross-community grants. One of the best things in Web3, and it's part of the reason why I'm wearing this t-shirt, is communities come together. How many of us are into anime? I'll go on a very quick tangent. How many of us are into anime? How many of us have seen Naruto before? Okay, one or two of us will get the context. In Naruto, you have all of these different villages who are fighting against each other. But then this big enemy comes along and they all unite to defeat the enemy. It takes about 15 years worth of episodes for us to get there in the end. But the key takeaway there is together, different communities were able to come together to defeat the bad guys. In our case, we are all of the different villages in Naruto, and the bad guys are your big mega corporations like your YouTubes, your Googles, your Facebooks, and so on and so forth. So the power of community is actually very important to network effects as well, which is why the cross-community grants are important. We have the IP propagation. You can use your image rights for merch. We've seen people use it for Bored and Hungry. We've seen many different kinds of businesses evolve from that. We've seen the evolvement or the coming of working groups. So we have a number of different working groups, the Metaverse working group, the governance working group as well, where there is more value being decentralized to the community. We have the Delegate Accelerator, and I'm going to fly through these because I think we're running out of time as well. We have GameFi initiatives and we have branding partners to help raise the value of the ecosystem. So what's super interesting here is we have all of these different moving parts, but for us really to understand network effects, we have to think of it as a spectrum. You might have so many different actors working together. We might have so many different actors within an ecosystem, but if they're not working together, we can start to see that it's very 2D. There's not much energy here. There's no vibrancy. People aren't communicating. People are not working together. Maybe this image here reflects it slightly better when there's more connectivity, more people working together. We have stronger network effects. And maybe the image at the end is an end state of where we want to be. Where we go from being 2D, we can argue that's 3D already, but entertain me. We go from being 2D to 3D, that we have this perfect symbiosis that's happening between all of the different communities, all of the different sub-DAOs, all of the different stakeholders, if you like, going back to this ecosystem to really get the positive network effects that are needed. So network effects, going back to the title, everything and nothing. If you have little to no network effects, the likelihood of your ecosystem growing is very close to zero. If you have very strong network effects, the likelihood of your ecosystem growing and being successful grows exponentially. So, in conclusion, and thank you, no one's fallen asleep, so I think I've done an all right job. In conclusion, network effects, they significantly influence the value and growth of digital networks, underpinned by this concept of tokenomics. Key takeaways here is that if done right, network effects will create that reinforcing cycle of value and of interest, of positive feedback loops. In addition to that, tokenomics leverages these effects to build robust digital economies, leveraging the different digital assets that we have within Web3. And very similar to property ownership, predictable rules and incentives encourage participation, investment, and growth. So being a tokenomics expert, whatever that means, I have to pay a bit of homage. So tokenomics does leverage network effects to create these robust, valuable digital economies during or driving innovation and growth. Thank you for listening. Here are some of my socials, and if any questions, let me know. Can I take a selfie with all of you in the background? Is that all right? Cool. I have consent. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.